My name is Clara Finch, and I'm 32 years old. For most of my life, I believed that my 2 hands, a good rolling pin, and my grandmother's recipes were all I needed to be happy. I make pies. Not fussy, pretentious things, but proper English pies with golden, flaky crusts that shatter just so, and deep, rich fillings that taste of home and patience. For years I was told this craft was worthless, a relic of a forgotten time. I was even publicly humiliated for it by the most celebrated chef in the country. But I never expected that the very thing he scorned, a humble steak and ale pie, would one day be my greatest vindication, served on royal porcelain in a palace banquet hall, all because the king's chef fell ill. It was the quietest, most delicious revenge I could have ever imagined. Before I dive into how a single disastrous television appearance led to the most terrifying and triumphant night of my life, I want to welcome you to my story. Let me know where you're watching from in the comments below. It's always amazing to see how far these stories travel. And if you've ever been made to feel small for doing something you love, go ahead and hit that like button. For all the new viewers, make sure you subscribe, because this is a community for people who understand that sometimes the quietest passions make the loudest impact. My story really begins not with me, but with my grandmother, Beatrice. She was the one who first put a dusting of flour on my nose and taught me that pastry has a memory. "You have to be gentle, Clara," she'd say, her hands gnarled with age but impossibly deft, guiding mine. "Don't rush it. Don't bully it. You listen to the dough." Her bakery, the Rolling Pin, wasn't on some trendy London high street. It was tucked away in a cobblestone lane in Islington, a little pocket of the city that time seemed to have forgotten. The air inside always smelled of butter, caramelized sugar, and stewing fruit. It was my sanctuary. When she passed away, she left it to me. It was a legacy of love, and I was determined to honor it. I kept her recipes, her methods, her unwavering belief in the power of simple, honest food. In a city obsessed with the new, the deconstructed, the molecular, I was an antique, and I was proud of it. That pride, however, was a quiet, fragile thing. London's culinary scene was a roaring beast, and its king was Chef Antoine Dubois. He was a French inferno of ego and ambition, with 2 Michelin stars and a television show where he traveled the country, passing judgment on lesser culinary mortals. He was famous for his foams, his gels, his essences. He didn't cook food, he curated experiences. He once served a single scallop on a slate tile with what he called a seaside air, which was just salty foam in a little vial. And people, critics and diners alike, worshipped him for it. To him, my kind of cooking wasn't just outdated, it was an offense. And one Tuesday morning, he decided to make that opinion known to the entire nation. I didn't know he was coming. The first sign was the massive television van that could barely squeeze down our lane, its cables snaking across the cobblestones like metallic pythons. Then a production assistant, a young woman with a clipboard and a perpetual look of terror, scurried in. "Chef Dubois will be filming on this street for his show, Taste of the Titan," she announced, not asked. "He might want to pop in. Just act natural." Act natural. It was the most unnatural request I'd ever heard. My heart began to thrum a frantic, heavy rhythm against my ribs. I could see him through the large bay window of the shop, striding down the lane like a conquering general. He was tall and lean, dressed in a black chef's jacket so crisp it looked like it could cut glass. A camera crew orbited him, capturing his every sneer and pronouncement. He gestured dismissively at the flower shop next door. Then his eyes landed on the Rolling Pin. I saw his lips curl into a smirk. It was the look of a predator that had just spotted a particularly slow, unsuspecting rabbit. The bell above my door chimed, a cheerful, innocent sound that was completely at odds with the dread coiling in my stomach. The shop suddenly felt tiny, invaded by the chef, his cameraman, and a sound guy holding a long, fuzzy microphone. The air, usually warm with the scent of my morning bake of sausage rolls and apple turnovers, was suddenly charged with an alien energy, cold and clinical. Antoine Dubois swept his gaze around my little shop. He didn't see the history, the love baked into the very walls. He saw flaws. He ran a disdainful finger along the worn wooden countertop, then examined it as if he'd touched something unclean. "Quaint," he said, the word dripping with condescension. His voice was a low, gravelly purr, heavily accented. "It is like stepping into a museum of, how do you say, culinary irrelevance." He glided over to the glass display case, where my life's work sat in neat rows. Golden-crusted steak and kidney pies, their tops glistening with egg wash. Plump chicken and mushroom pies, with delicate pastry leaves for decoration. deep-filled apple and blackberry crumbles, their oaty tops promising a perfect crunch. To me, it was a landscape of comfort and tradition. To him, it was a graveyard. "Ah, yes, the English pie," he mused, speaking more to the camera than to me. "So brown, so heavy. It is the food of peasants, no? Designed to fill the stomach after a long day in the fields, not to delight the palate. It is culinary hibernation." My face burned. I wanted the floor to swallow me whole. I felt a desperate urge to defend my grandmother's legacy, but my voice was trapped in my throat, strangled by a mixture of awe and humiliation. I was just a baker. He was a titan. Who was I to argue? My customers seemed to like them. I managed to whisper, the words sounding feeble and pathetic even to my own ears. He gave a short, barking laugh. "Your customers, mademoiselle, have been conditioned by centuries of culinary mediocrity. They do not know what they are missing. They eat this stodge because it is what their grandmothers ate. It is nostalgia, not gastronomy." He pointed a long, accusatory finger at a row of perfectly glazed Eccles cakes. "And this, what is this monstrosity? A lump of dough filled with currants and an obscene amount of sugar. There is no finesse, no technique. It is a brute force assault on the senses." He instructed the cameraman to zoom in. "You see?" he said to his audience at home. "This is the problem with English cooking. It is afraid of elegance. It hides behind tradition because it lacks innovation." Then, he turned his cold, dark eyes on me. "I will take one." He didn't ask, he commanded. I numbly wrapped an Eccles cake in a piece of waxed paper and placed it in a small paper bag. He paid for it with a crisp 50-pound note, telling me to keep the change with a wave of his hand that implied the money, like my cakes, was beneath him. The real performance was for the camera, just outside my shop door. He unwrapped the cake with theatrical slowness. He held it up to the light, inspecting it like a flawed diamond. "And now, the moment of truth," he declared. He took a small, precise bite. He chewed once, twice, his handsome face contorted into a mask of pure disgust. With a dramatic flair, he leaned over and spat the mouthful of cake into a silk pocket square he'd produced from his jacket. "Inedible," he pronounced, his voice booming down the quiet lane. "A sticky, cloying disaster. My condolences to your teeth, England." He tossed the rest of the cake into a nearby bin, wiped his mouth with the sullied silk, and strode away, his entourage trailing in his wake, leaving me standing in the doorway of my empty shop, my heart in pieces. The show aired a week later. It was even worse than I had remembered. They had edited it for maximum humiliation, cutting to slow-motion shots of my horrified face, interspersing Dubois's insults with dramatic, ominous music. The segment ended with him back in his own gleaming, futuristic kitchen, whipping up a reimagined Eccles cake, which was a transparent sphere containing a single currant suspended in a spiced sugar gel. "This," he said, holding it up to the camera. "The aftermath was immediate and brutal. My regulars, bless them, tried to rally. They bought extra pies and offered words of support. But the damage was done. A new type of customer started appearing. Tourists, mostly, who had seen the show. They didn't come to buy anything. They came to stare, to point, to take pictures of the shop that had been so thoroughly savaged by the great Chef Dubois. Some would cup their hands against the window and laugh. A group of teenagers even started a trend of taking selfies while pretending to spit on the pavement outside. My sales plummeted. The joy I had once found in my work curdled into a constant, churning anxiety. Every time the bell on the door chimed, I would flinch, expecting another sneer, another camera phone. I started having nightmares where Antoine Dubois would chase me through endless corridors, pelting me with my own rock-hard pastries. The bakery, once my sanctuary, felt like a cage where I was the main exhibit. I considered closing up for good. The thought was a physical pain, a betrayal of my grandmother and everything she had taught me. I felt like a complete and utter failure. One rainy afternoon, as I was staring at the day's unsold pies, contemplating my grim future, Mrs. Higgins came in. Mrs. Higgins was a fixture in the neighborhood, a tiny woman in her late 80s with impossibly bright blue eyes and a spine made of steel. She had been my grandmother's friend and my most loyal customer. She bought a steak and kidney pie every Wednesday. For my supper, she'd always say. She saw the look on my face and her own expression, usually a cheerful crinkle of wrinkles hardened with concern. She placed her worn leather handbag on the counter. "Now then, Clara," she said, her voice surprisingly firm. "None of that. You've got a face on you like a smacked flounder." I tried to smile, but it felt like my face was cracking. "It's just business is slow, Mrs. Higgins. Slow. It's that preening French peacock from the television, isn't it? She sniffed, her disdain for Dubois palpable. I saw the program. Disgraceful. A man who knows nothing about heart. I finally broke. The tears I'd been holding back for weeks spilled over. He said my food was peasant food, that it was stodgy and disgusting. And he's right. Look at it. It's just brown. It's not clever, it's not art. Mrs. Higgins reached across the counter and patted my hand. Her skin was as soft and thin as parchment. Don't you dare let that man's poison get in your head, she said fiercely. He makes food for people who want to take pictures of it. You make food for people who want to eat it. There's a world of difference. She leaned in, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. Let me tell you something, my girl. When I was young, younger than you are now, I worked in the kitchens at Buckingham Palace. A scullery maid I was. And I saw the food they served at the grandest banquets. And do you know what the royal family truly loved? The simple things. A good shepherd's pie. A proper roast. A slice of Battenberg cake with their afternoon tea. Food with history. Food with soul. Food exactly like yours. She straightened up, her point made. That man, with his foams and his fancies, he wouldn't know good food if it jumped up and bit him on his perfectly sculpted nose. Your grandmother knew it. I know it. And you know it too. You've just forgotten. Her words were a balm on my wounded spirit. It wasn't a magic cure, but it was a start. It was a tiny spark of defiance in the suffocating darkness of my self-doubt. The idea that my humble pies were closer to the Queen's table than Dubois' pretentious creations was a secret, delicious thought that I held on to. That conversation with Mrs. Higgins didn't fix my financial problems, but it fixed something more important, my resolve. I decided I wasn't going to let Antoine Dubois destroy my grandmother's legacy. If people wouldn't come to the rolling pin, then the rolling pin would come to them. I printed up simple flyers and started a delivery service for the local office buildings. I'd load up a trolley with hot foil-wrapped pies and sausage rolls and wheel it around during the lunch hour. It was humbling work. Some days I sold everything, other days I'd return with most of it, the rejection feeling heavy in my arms. But slowly, painstakingly, I built a new customer base. Secretaries, accountants, junior executives, people who were tired of sad, prepackaged sandwiches and yearned for a proper hot lunch. They didn't care about Michelin stars or television celebrity. They just cared that my steak and ale pie was packed with tender meat and a rich dark gravy, and that the pastry was buttery and crisp. While I was trundling my trolley through office parks, Antoine Dubois was ascending to even greater heights. He was announced as the king's new personal chef, a position of incredible prestige. The newspapers were full of it. There were interviews where he talked about his grand vision to revolutionize the royal palate and drag Buckingham Palace into the 21st century. He was tasked with planning and executing the menu for the upcoming state banquet in honor of the visiting German chancellor, an elderly, notoriously traditional statesman. Dubois boasted to a journalist from the Times that his menu would be a symphony of textures and temperatures, a culinary narrative that will challenge and provoke. He spoke of spherified peas, leek ash, and a dessert that involved a nitrogen-frozen rose being shattered at the table. I read the article sitting in my tiny flat above the shop, eating a leftover chicken and mushroom pie for dinner. The gulf between our worlds had never felt so vast. He was composing symphonies for kings and I was selling pies out of a trolley. But Mrs. Higgins's words echoed in my mind. Food with soul. I focused on my work, perfecting my craft not for critics or cameras but for myself. I found a new supplier for my beef, a small farm in the Cotswolds that raised grass-fed cattle. I tinkered with my pastry recipe, adding a little more lard for extra flakiness. I slow-cooked my fillings for hours until the flavors were deep and complex. My work became a quiet meditation, a daily act of defiance against the man who had declared it worthless. I didn't know it then, but with every perfectly crimped pie, I was preparing for a battle I had no idea I was about to be conscripted into. The eve of the royal banquet was, by all accounts, a scene of controlled chaos in the kitchens of Buckingham Palace. I pieced together the story later from various sources, but I can picture it perfectly. The cavernous, gleaming white and stainless steel space, usually a model of quiet efficiency, was a pressure cooker. At its center, a storm of fury and perfectionism, was Chef Antoine Dubois. He moved through the kitchen like a shark, his black eyes missing nothing. He tasted a sauce and spat it into a sink, screaming at a terrified young sous chef about the precise salinity of a single caper. He berated another for slicing a carrot at a 70-degree angle instead of the mandated 75. He was a tyrant in his element, orchestrating his magnum opus. His menu was the talk of the town, leaked in tantalizing fragments to the press. The starter was to be Tidal Memories, a dish featuring a single, impossibly rare oyster from a remote Scottish loch, served with a seawater foam and an edible sand made from toasted malt. The main course was a study in bovine essence, a piece of beef cooked sous vide for 72 hours, accompanied by a single drop of concentrated Jews and a smear of parsnip puree. It was a menu designed not to be enjoyed but to be admired, photographed, and written about. The final flourish, the one he was most proud of, was a garnish for the oyster starter. It involved a specific, exotic type of Norwegian langoustine, prized for its sweetness. They were to be served raw, their translucent flesh meant to evoke the purity of the ocean. As the final prep began, Dubois, in a rare act of hands-on participation, decided to inspect the langoustines himself. He prided himself on his palate, on his ability to discern the faintest notes of flavor. He picked up one of the delicate pinkish-white shellfish, admired its form, and then, to test its freshness, popped the morsel into his mouth. For a moment there was nothing. Then a strange expression crossed his face. He blinked. A small, red welt appeared on his left cheek. He scratched at his throat, a confused look in his eyes. Within a minute his face was swelling, his skin turning a blotchy, alarming shade of crimson. He gasped for air, his throat constricting. The tyrannical chef, the titan of taste, was having a violent, sudden, and severe allergic reaction. Anaphylaxis. Panic erupted in the pristine kitchen. Sous chefs who had been trembling before him moments earlier were now shouting for a medic. The palace physician was summoned, an EpiPen was administered, and the great chef Dubois was unceremoniously bundled onto a stretcher and rushed to the hospital, his multi-million-pound menu left half-finished on the gleaming countertops. Upstairs, in the richly appointed offices of the royal household, Deputy Steward Alistair Finch was blissfully unaware of the culinary drama unfolding below. He was reviewing the seating chart for the banquet, a logistical nightmare of protocol and politics, when his assistant burst in, pale-faced. "Sir," she stammered, "it's Chef Dubois. There's been an incident." Alistair was a man who thrived on order. He was impeccably dressed, unflappably calm, and prided himself on his ability to solve any problem with quiet, British efficiency. But the news that his star chef was not only incapacitated, but had been felled by his own ludicrously expensive ingredients sent a jolt of pure, unadulterated terror through him. The banquet was in less than 24 hours. 200 guests, including the king, the prime minister, and the notoriously fussy German chancellor, were expecting a world-class meal. Canceling or postponing was a diplomatic impossibility. It would be an international embarrassment. Alistair descended to the kitchens and found a scene of headless chicken panic. The sous chefs were lost. Dubois' recipes were more like chemical formulas than cooking instructions, and he had been the only one who understood his own bizarre genius. The half-prepped components for Tidal Memories and a study in bovine essence looked like a failed science experiment. The situation was catastrophic. Alistair gathered his senior team. "We need a new menu," he said, his voice tight with stress. "And we need a new chef, now." They spent the next 2 hours in a frantic flurry of phone calls. They called every Michelin-starred chef in London, every celebrity chef, every prestigious hotel kitchen. The answer was always the same. "Tomorrow night? For the king? Absolutely impossible. We're fully booked." It would be professional suicide to attempt something like that with no notice. Every refusal tightened the knot of dread in Alistair's stomach. The clock was ticking. They were running out of options, and fast. Defeated and desperate, Alistair slumped at his desk and made a call he often made when stressed, a call to his mother. He vented his frustrations, outlining the impossible situation. "The Chancellor is 78 years old, Mother. He doesn't want spherified peas and edible sand. He wants actual food. Something simple, traditional, proper English food, you know? The kind of thing Nana always used to talk about from her time working at the palace." There was a pause on the other end of the line. "Nana," his mother said slowly. "You mean Mrs. Higgins?" Alistair sat up straight. A forgotten memory flickered in his mind. His grandmother, Mrs. Higgins, had been a kitchen maid at the palace as a young woman, and she had never stopped telling stories about it. And for the past few years she had been endlessly, passionately raving about a little local bakery in her neighborhood, and the woman who ran it, a woman who made, in his grandmother's opinion, the best pies in all of England. "She's always going on about this place, the rolling pin," his mother continued. "Says the pastry is a miracle." It was an absurd long shot. A tiny, unknown neighborhood baker. It was insane. But it was also the only option they had left. He found his grandmother's number and dialed, his heart pounding. 10 minutes later, a sleek, black royal car was dispatched to a quiet, cobblestoned lane in Islington. I was on my hands and knees, scrubbing the bakery floor. It was nearly 10 o'clock at night, and I was bone-tired. It had been a particularly slow day, and the weight of my struggle was pressing down on me. I was lost in a haze of exhaustion and the smell of bleach when the headlights swept across my front window, momentarily blinding me. I peered out to see a car so black and shiny it seemed to absorb the light from the street lamps. It looked utterly alien, parked next to my little delivery van. A man in a sharp suit got out. He looked as out of place as his car, his polished shoes clicking nervously on the uneven cobblestones. He peered at the sign above my door, then hesitantly pushed it open. The little bell chimed. "Miss Clara Finch?" he asked, his voice strained. I stood up, wiping my wet hands on my apron. "Yes? Can I help you?" I thought he was a health inspector, or perhaps someone from the council about a late payment. "My name is Alistair Finch," he said, "deputy steward of the royal household." For a moment the shared surname threw me, a bizarre coincidence in a surreal situation. Then the rest of his words registered. I was certain it was a prank, a cruel, elaborate joke orchestrated by someone who had seen the TV show. "Right," I said, my voice flat with disbelief. "And I'm the Queen of Sheba. Look, if this is about the show, it was months ago. Can't you people just leave me alone?" The man's face, already pale with stress, seemed to crumple. "Miss Finch, I assure you, this is no joke. We are in a desperate situation." And then he told me the whole unbelievable story. The banquet, the German chancellor, Chef Dubois, the allergic reaction to the Norwegian langoustine. It sounded like a plot from a ridiculous comedy, but the sheer panic in his eyes was undeniable. It was real. "Chef Dubois is incapacitated," he finished, his voice almost a plea. "The banquet is tomorrow night. We have no chef and no menu. My grandmother, a Mrs. Higgins, she recommended you." Mrs. Higgins. The name cut through my disbelief like a hot knife through butter. Of course, this had her fingerprints all over it. My head was spinning. The king, a banquet, Buckingham Palace. It was a world so far removed from my own that I couldn't even process it. And then, a wave of cold fury washed over me. "Let me get this straight," I said, my voice shaking with a sudden, unfamiliar anger. "You come to me for help? After your chef, the king's chef, stood right here in my shop and told the entire country that my food was disgusting, inedible peasant food, and now you want me to cook that same food for the king? The hypocrisy is breathtaking." Alistair Finch had the decency to look ashamed. "I know. I saw the program. What he did was appalling, Miss Finch. Unprofessional and cruel. But right now, his opinion is utterly irrelevant. He is in a hospital bed, and I have 200 state guests arriving in less than 24 hours who need to be fed. The German chancellor, our guest of honor, is known to appreciate traditional fare. We don't need foams and gels. We need pies. We need what you do." He was desperate, and his desperation gave me a strange sense of power I had never felt before. I thought of the taunts, the empty shop, the feeling of utter worthlessness that had clung to me for months, and I thought of my grandmother and Mrs. Higgins and their unwavering belief in the simple, honest craft they had taught me. Fear was warring with a wild, terrifying thrill inside me. "I can't," I said, the fear momentarily winning. "I cook in a small shop kitchen. I've never served more than 50 people in a day. The palace kitchens, the staff, they'll eat me alive." "They will do as they are told," Alistair said firmly. "You will be in charge. You will have access to any ingredient, any piece of equipment, and the full support of the royal household. We just need your skill. Please, Miss Finch. You are quite literally our last and only hope." I looked around my little bakery, at the worn wooden counters, the old ovens, the rolling pin my grandmother had used. It was my whole world, and this man was offering me a glimpse into another one, a terrifying, intimidating, magnificent world. It was the ultimate test of everything I believed in. Could my simple, honest food really stand on a stage like that? Taking a deep breath that did little to calm my racing heart, I looked Alistair Finch directly in the eye. "All right," I said, the words sounding foreign and brave coming out of my mouth. "I'll do it." The journey to Buckingham Palace was a blur. I sat in the silent, leather-scented interior of the royal car, my flour-dusted apron still on over my jeans, my mind a whirlwind of panic and possibility. We swept through the grand gates, past the stoic guards in their bearskin hats, and pulled up to a discreet side entrance. The world I stepped into was one of stark, intimidating efficiency. The royal kitchens were a labyrinth of stainless steel and white tile, vast and gleaming under harsh fluorescent lights. It was cold, impersonal, and a million miles away from the warm, flowery chaos of my own little bakery. A line of about 20 kitchen staff, all in pristine whites, were assembled. They were Dubois' brigade, a crack team of culinary professionals, and they stared at me with expressions ranging from open curiosity to barely concealed contempt. I could hear their thoughts as clearly as if they'd shouted them. This is who they brought in to save the banquet? This little baker in a dirty apron? Alistair introduced me. This is Miss Clara Finch. She will be acting as executive chef for the banquet. You will give her your full and unconditional cooperation. The head sous chef, a tall, severe-looking man named Jean-Pierre, who was Dubois' second-in-command, stepped forward. With all due respect, Monsieur Finch, he said in a thick French accent, we have the menu of Chef Dubois. It is half prepared. We can attempt to finish it. I walked over to one of the prep stations. It was covered in the remnants of Dubois' vision. There was a tray of grayish foam, a bowl of black dust that was apparently leek ash, and a vacuum-sealed bag containing a pale, sad-looking piece of beef. It wasn't food. It was an autopsy. I took a deep breath, channeling every bit of courage Mrs. Higgins had instilled in me. No, I said, my voice clearer and stronger than I expected. We're not serving this. I turned to the assembled staff. We are scrapping all of this, right now. A collective gasp went through the room. Jean-Pierre looked like I had just slapped him. Scrapping it. Mademoiselle, this is the work of Chef Dubois. Chef Dubois is in the hospital, I retorted, meeting his incredulous gaze. His work is irrelevant. We have a banquet to prepare for the king, and we will be serving proper English food. For a moment, nobody moved. It was a standoff. My heart hammered against my ribs. This was it. The moment they would either laugh me out of the kitchen or fall in line. I decided to press on, my voice gaining confidence with every word. I need flour, butter, cold and unsalted, good beef, from the chuck or the shin, well marbled, onions, carrots, celery, dark ale, suet, lard for the pastry. I need good sharp cheddar cheese, potatoes for mashing, and apples, Bramleys if you have them, and cinnamon, nutmeg, and brown sugar. The words tumbled out of me, a litany of simple, honest ingredients. It was a language they all understood, even if it wasn't the one they were used to hearing. It was the language of classical technique, the foundation upon which all of Dubois' foams and gels were built. I saw a flicker of something in the eyes of a few of the younger chefs, not respect yet, but recognition. A young woman at the back of the line finally broke the silence. We have a whole side of beef from the royal estate in the cold room, ma'am, and the lard is in the pantry. It broke the spell. Jean-Pierre, seeing his authority wavering, gave a curt, angry nod. The kitchen exploded into motion. It was a race against time. For the next 18 hours, the palace kitchens were a blur of controlled, frantic activity. I laid out my plan, a simple, elegant, and unapologetically traditional menu. The main course would be individual steak and ale pies. The pastry had to be perfect, the filling rich and slow-cooked. We'd also offer a classic fish pie with a cheesy mashed potato crust for those who didn't eat meat. For dessert, a glorious apple and blackberry crumble with homemade vanilla custard, and delicate individual Bakewell tarts with a single glazed cherry on top. At first, the staff were clumsy, their movements trained for Dubois's delicate tweezers and pipette style of cooking. But soon they found their rhythm. I showed Jean-Pierre the way my grandmother taught me to make pastry, rubbing the cold fat into the flour with just the tips of my fingers until it resembled fine breadcrumbs. He watched, skeptical at first, then intrigued. I taught the younger chefs how to properly crimp the edge of a pie, creating the tight seal that would keep the gravy from bubbling out. I didn't shout or scream like Dubois. I explained. I demonstrated. I worked alongside them, my hands deep in flour and dough. Slowly, imperceptibly, the atmosphere in the kitchen began to change. The sterile, tense environment of Dubois' reign was replaced by something else. The clinical smells of his bizarre concoctions gave way to the rich, comforting aromas of onions softening in butter, beef browning in a pan, apples stewing with cinnamon. It smelled like home. It smelled like my little bakery. Midway through the afternoon, I hit a wall of pure exhaustion and self-doubt. Surrounded by 200 perfect little pastry lids, A moment of sheer terror washed over me. What was I doing? Who was I to think my simple food was fit for a king? I felt a hand on my shoulder. It was Jean-Pierre. "The gravy for the steak pie, mademoiselle," he said, holding out a spoon. "I believe it is ready." His voice was different. The sneer was gone, replaced by a quiet professionalism. I tasted the gravy. It was perfect, deep, savory, with a hint of sweetness from the long-cooked onions. I looked at him and nodded. "It's perfect, Jean-Pierre. Thank you." In that small moment, an unspoken truce was formed. He saw not a simple baker, but a chef who knew her craft. And I saw not a culinary snob, but a professional who respected skill wherever he found it. As the banquet hour approached, the tension mounted. The pies were in the ovens, turning a perfect golden brown. The crumble was cooling, ready to be served warm. The custard was velvety smooth. The kitchen brigade, once a resentful and skeptical crew, now moved as a single, efficient unit. They were my team. The first call came for the main course. With military precision, the waiters lined up, and 200 gleaming silver platters were loaded with my little steak and ale pies, each one a perfect golden dome, served with a side of creamy mashed potatoes and glazed carrots. As they marched out of the kitchen doors, a profound silence fell over us. All we could do now was wait. Alistair had arranged for a small monitor in a corner of the kitchen, showing a live feed from the banquet hall. We all gathered around it, a huddle of anxious chefs in white. We watched as the pies were placed before the king and the German chancellor. My heart felt like it was going to beat its way out of my chest. I couldn't breathe. The king picked up his fork and knife. He tapped the crust of the pie. He cut a small piece, ensuring he got some of the rich filling. The camera zoomed in as he lifted the fork to his mouth. He chewed thoughtfully. Then he paused. It was the longest 10 seconds of my life. He turned to the German chancellor, who was also taking his first bite. The king smiled, a genuine warm smile. He said something we couldn't hear, and then he took another, much larger bite. The chancellor nodded vigorously, a look of pure, unadulterated pleasure on his face. A collective sigh of relief went through the kitchen. It was so loud it was almost a cheer. We had done it. A few minutes later, a footman hurried back into the kitchen, his face flushed with excitement. "The chancellor," he announced to the room, "has asked me to convey his compliments to the chef. He says it is the finest English cooking he has tasted in his 50 years of diplomatic visits." Another cheer, louder this time, erupted. Jean-Pierre actually clapped me on the back. But the true vindication came when the dessert plates were cleared. A message came back from the king's own page. "His Majesty has requested the recipe for the apple crumble." It was a small thing, a simple request, but it felt like the greatest prize in the world. Alistair Finch came into the kitchen. His face, which had been a mask of pure stress for 24 hours, was now beaming with a kind of radiant relief. He walked straight over to me, past all the other chefs. "Miss Finch," he said, his voice thick with emotion, "you have done more than just save a banquet. You have performed a miracle." Standing there, in the heart of the royal palace, covered in flour and exhaustion, I finally truly believed him. I left the palace just before dawn, slipping out the same side door I had entered what felt like a lifetime ago. The royal car drove me back through the sleeping streets of London to my quiet little lane. The world looked exactly the same, but everything for me had changed. I was exhausted, but it was a different kind of tired. It was the deep, satisfying ache of a job well done, of a challenge met and conquered. It felt clean. I unlocked the door to my bakery, and the familiar smell of old wood, sugar, and yeast wrapped around me like a warm hug. It felt like coming home after a long, strange journey. Instead of going upstairs to sleep, I found myself tying on a clean apron. I started mixing dough for the morning's batch of bread. The simple, repetitive motion of kneading was grounding, a way to process the surreal events of the past day. I opened the shop at 7 o'clock, just as I always did. The first hint that my life was no longer my own came around 9 o'clock. A man in a trench coat came in, bought a sausage roll, and then revealed he was a reporter for the Daily Mail. He started peppering me with questions. "Is it true you've replaced Chef Dubois? What was it like cooking for the king? Did you really serve him a pie?" By lunchtime, the lane outside the rolling pin looked like a movie premiere. There were news vans, photographers with long-lensed cameras, and reporters all shouting my name. My little bakery was on the front page of every newspaper website. The pie queen who saved the palace. Humble baker topples celebrity chef. They told the story with relish, contrasting my simple, traditional background with the arrogant, now hospitalized Antoine Dubois. My quiet, anonymous life had been shattered forever. My regulars were thrilled, forming a protective barrier around the shop door, trying to fend off the most aggressive reporters. Mrs. Higgins arrived, armed with her sharpest tongue and her sturdiest handbag, which she used to swat at a particularly intrusive photographer. "Leave the girl alone, you vultures," she commanded, and for a moment they actually backed away. It was overwhelming, but it was also strangely validating. The world was suddenly celebrating me for the very thing I had been mocked for. A few days later, after the media frenzy had died down to a low simmer, the bell on my shop door chimed. I looked up from the counter, and my heart skipped a beat. It was Antoine Dubois. He looked diminished. The arrogant swagger was gone. He was pale, thinner, and the fire in his eyes had been banked to a low ember. He was dressed not in his crisp chef's whites but in a simple gray sweater. He stood awkwardly just inside the door, looking at my display of pies with a new, unreadable expression. "Mademoiselle Finch," he said, his voice quiet, stripped of its usual booming arrogance. "May I have a word?" I nodded, my hands suddenly clammy. I gestured for him to come through to the small kitchen at the back of the shop. I put the kettle on. It felt like the only normal thing to do. We sat in silence for a moment at my small wooden table. "I heard about the banquet," he finally said, not meeting my eye. "Jean-Pierre called me. He told me what you did, what you cooked." He looked up at me then, and what I saw in his eyes wasn't anger or resentment. It was a profound, weary shame. He said it was magnificent. He said the king asked for your crumble recipe. "He did," I said quietly. Dubois shook his head slowly. "For months, I have been planning my revolution, my foams, my essences. I wanted to teach the palace what fine dining was, and in one night, you undid it all with a pie." He finally said the word he had spat out with such disgust all those months ago. "I owe you an apology, mademoiselle. What I said on my show, what I did to you, it was unforgivable. It was born of arrogance, of insecurity, perhaps. I saw your honesty, your tradition, and I was afraid of it, so I mocked it. It was the last thing I ever expected to hear from him." The apology was genuine. I could feel it. And a strange thing happened. The anger I had held onto for so long just dissolved. It no longer mattered. "Why are you really here, chef?" I asked. He looked down at his hands. "Jean-Pierre told me about your pastry. He said it was like nothing he had ever seen. He said it was perfect. I came to ask you, how do you do it? What is the secret?" I smiled, a real, genuine smile. The power dynamic between us had been completely inverted. He, the great chef, was asking me, the humble baker, for my secrets. And I realized in that moment that I no longer needed anything from him. Not his approval, not his validation, not even his apology, though I was glad to have it. "It's not a secret, chef," I told him, getting up to pour the tea. "It's just honesty. Honest ingredients, honest work. You don't bully it. You listen to the dough. Perhaps you should try it sometime." I handed him a cup of tea and a warm Eccles cake, fresh from the oven. He took it, and this time he ate the whole thing. A week later, Alistair Finch returned to the bakery. He was back to his usual unflappable self, but there was a new warmth in his smile. He came bearing not a crisis, but an offer. An official, embossed letter from the master of the royal household. It was a contract. They wanted to retain my services, to make the rolling pin an official supplier of traditional baked goods for royal events and the private family residences. It wasn't just a one-off. It was a permanent arrangement, a royal warrant. It was a life-changing, unbelievable opportunity to take everything my grandmother had built and elevate it to a level she could never have dreamed of. I thought about the struggle, the humiliation, the days of wheeling my little trolley around in the rain, and I thought of the feeling of seeing the king enjoy my simple pie. The decision was the easiest I had ever made. I accepted the contract, but on my own terms. I wouldn't be moving into the palace kitchens. The rolling pin would remain my base, my home. The magic was in these walls, in this old oven, in this specific corner of London. The palace agreed. The contract brought with it the resources to expand. I bought the lease on the empty shop next door, knocking through the wall to create a larger, brighter kitchen and a proper cafe space out front. I didn't want to create a sterile, modern space. I kept the warm wood, the mismatched chairs, the cozy, lived-in feel. I just made it bigger. I hired staff, mostly young people from the neighborhood who were struggling to find work. I taught them my grandmother's methods, showing them how to listen to the dough just as she had taught me. I found a young apprentice, a girl named Maya, who had a natural talent and a passion for baking that reminded me of myself at her age. Mentoring her, passing on the legacy, brought me a new kind of joy. I named the expanded business the Rolling Pin of Islington. No royal crests, no fancy titles. I wanted it to remain a neighborhood bakery at heart, a place of comfort and welcome that just happened to occasionally bake for a king. A few months after we reopened, Alistair Finch brought his grandmother for afternoon tea. Mrs. Higgins sat at her favorite table by the window, beaming with a pride that was so radiant it seemed to light up the whole cafe. She looked around at the bustling room, at the happy customers eating slices of Victoria sponge and Bakewell tarts, and she squeezed my hand. "Beatrice would be so proud of you, my dear," she whispered, her bright blue eyes shimmering. "So very proud." Alistair, looking more relaxed than I'd ever seen him, was eating a steak and ale pie. "You know," he said between mouthfuls, "we haven't had a single request for foam or essence at the palace since the banquet. It's all shepherd's pie and sticky toffee pudding now. You've ruined us for anything else." We all laughed, looking at them, at my thriving bakery, at Maya expertly crimping a row of pies in the kitchen. I felt a sense of peace that was as deep and satisfying as any of my slow-cooked fillings. The validation I had once craved from people like Antoine Dubois, from the critics, from the world at large, it all seemed so unimportant now. My validation was here, in the smiles of my customers, in the weight of a perfectly made pie in my hands, in the knowledge that I had stayed true to myself and my craft. Looking back, the day Antoine Dubois walked into my shop was not the worst day of my life, but the most important. His scorn was a gift. It forced me into the wilderness, where I had to rely on nothing but my own two hands and my own belief in what I was doing. Being underestimated, I realized, is a secret power. When people dismiss you, they don't watch you. And when they're not watching, you have the freedom to practice, to perfect, to become so good that they can no longer ignore you. My story isn't really about a royal banquet or a celebrity chef. It's about the quiet dignity of a craft and the simple truth that quality, honesty, and a little bit of heart will always, always win in the end. Thank you for listening to my story. It's been a journey, and sharing it with you all means the world to me. I'd love to hear from you in the comments. Have you ever been underestimated or had your passion dismissed by others? How did you find the strength to keep going? Your stories are what make this community so special. If my journey resonated with you, please don't forget to like this video and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss out on more stories like this one. And if you know someone who needs to hear that their quiet passion has value, please share this with them. Remember, your worth is not determined by the opinions of others. It is baked into the very core of who you are. Thank you for joining me, and I wish you all the strength to honor your own truth.